We'll go ahead and start. So we'll just take a minute, set the motivation, refuge and bodhicitta. Sangye chudan sogi chunam lai janchu padu dani kapsuchi dagi chunyen gipe sonam ki jola penche sangye drupa sho sangye chudan sogi chunam la janchu padu dani kapsuchi Dagi chanyan gi pe sonam ki drola penche sange drupa sho sange chudon sogi chunam la janchu padu dane kapsuchi dagi chanyan gi pe sonam ki drola penche sange drupa sho. And just repeating that refuge in bodhicitta prayer and concept in your heart for a moment. Letting it settle in, letting it connect. So it's wonderful to see you all. And I think that this can be a really wonderful conversation to have. And I really hope that you feel comfortable to ask your questions and to share your ideas. And whether you come every single week or you pop in and out, please feel like you can engage at any time. We can have a really relaxed atmosphere. So we'll start by kind of doing a quick review of last week, just in case anybody's new, because there were some key concepts that are important to be on top of before we do anything new. And then we'll go through the questions that some of the students offered last time and go through those, and then we'll start with some new material. So there was a question about like existence or evident things or what is experienced. And so we'll just start with some definitions to start the conversation. So what exists? That which is perceivable by mind. What is an evident phenomena? Phenomena that ordinary beings can perceive with their five senses. So evident phenomena is related to that, that word manifest phenomena that we used last week, evident, manifest, same. These are things perceivable by the five senses. Existent phenomena are a little bit more subtle, or I should say, it's a broader category. Existent phenomena is a broader category, things perceivable by more than just the five sensory consciousnesses. So then we talk about like ascertainable or knowable objects. And here's where it gets a bit more technical. And we say that which is cognized by awareness or that which is comprehended by valid cognition. So it's not really clearer when you read the definitions, is it? You think, what exists? Well, if the mind can know it, it exists. And then you think, well, what about things that don't exist, but I can imagine, for example? Are those existent phenomena? And I'm guessing that's kind of the crux of the issue. I can imagine a pink elephant. It doesn't mean that there are pink elephants, right? I can imagine world peace. Maybe that will help bring it into fruition, or maybe that's just a fairy story in my mind. So just because it's in the mind doesn't mean it's real. But existent is kind of a more abstract term in Buddhism. And we can talk about things that are, there's probably a technical word that I should look up, but there are things that are accurately existent and things that are kind of inaccurately existent. There are wrong consciousnesses, and then there are consciousnesses that are simply mistaken. Okay, so right now, ordinary beings, everything that appears to our mind is colored by ignorance. Everything, right? So there's something that exists, but the way we perceive it is incorrect because it's got like a shading of inherence to it, or a superimposition of inherence to it. So it's there, but not in the way that it seems. It exists, but not how it appears. But then there's extra things like, say, for example, you have jaundice and things appear yellow, or you're wearing sunglasses and the white snow mountain appears blue. Now that's just wrong, right? The snow mountain is not blue. Yeah. So there's different levels that we're talking about in terms of accuracy. And when we're talking in terms of practice, the thing becomes first to understand that anything that is relative truth is by nature obscure, right? And so, practically speaking, what exists for us, what exists and what doesn't exist, we have to just look at kind of basic things that we understand about like mental health. That goes very well with the Buddhist idea of wrong or mistaken consciousness. We would say mistaken in the sense of an appearance of true existence, but not wrong by worldly convention. If we were looking at like mental health stuff, we could say that person has a delusion present because they're seeing the pink elephants, even though there are no pink elephants there. Yeah, so they're perceiving a non-existent, even though it exists to their mind. So I don't know if that made it more tidy or less tidy for you. I think that was your question, Sneh. Did you want to ask a follow-up? Making it more tidy, less tidy?
Definitely more tidy. I really like that pink elephant thing because I think that was exactly what I was trying to say is I can imagine, all those things, but do they really exist or not? And then I think you were saying then I have to see if by the rules of valid knowing,
Cognition, yeah.
yeah, would you agree with me that there's a pink elephant or not if I was to tell you such a thing?
And the criteria is kind of just worldly convention.
Yeah.
There's a few more criteria for what makes something a valid base, valid perception, not being destroyed by a valid cognition, analyzing the ultimate. There's all sorts of criteria for what is a valid basis. But for our purposes, the main one is agreed by worldly convention. And we're not talking about like worldly convention in terms of opinions, like an opinion that flowers are beautiful or an opinion that flowers are annoying. It's not like that kind of worldly convention. It's about kind of deep worldly conventions like that is a solid object, that is a liquid object, those kind of conventions that everyone agrees on, whether they have different words or opinions about them or not.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we can keep coming back to that because it's a tricky one and it's worth digging into. So then there's also what is omniscience. Okay, and so this is from the Berzin archives. And if you guys don't know about the Study Buddhism website, know about it. It's a fantastic resource. So this is from the glossary from Dr. Berzin. And he says, based on valid sources, a Buddha's unceasing, manifest, non-conceptual cognition, simultaneously of all validly knowable phenomena and their voidness, emptiness. So in other words, of the two truths, relative and ultimate, about all knowable phenomena. So omniscience is knowing everything all the time, knowing relative truth and ultimate truth simultaneously without any kind of interruption and in a direct perception way, as opposed to a conceptual way. So the difference between perception and conception is going to keep coming up again and again, but the surface understanding to get to know before we deepen it, perception is known directly, conception is known via a trajectory that includes something called a generic image, which is kind of like a snapshot in your mind of what you assume it to be because you can refer it to something you've seen before. So our senses, our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, etc., are operating in a very direct way without any kind of intermediary. But then we also have the mental consciousness, which usually is operating in a very conceptual way with all sorts of impressions from the past and impressions from ignorance coloring what we see in this moment. A Buddha doesn't have that. Everything that appears to a Buddha's mind is direct and accurate. And for us, we can understand relative truth in a sense, we can understand ultimate truth intellectually, eventually perceptually. Once we become an Arya being on the path of seeing, we can see emptiness, ultimate truth directly. but only while we're in meditative equipoise. Once we leave meditative equipoise, we remember the powerful experiences we had on the meditation cushion, but still there's the appearance of things inherently existing. There's the impression of things inherently existing. Our belief in that is less and less the more we meditate on emptiness, but the appearance is still there. Yeah, it's a little bit like, how to say, I mean, the classic example is that, like for us, when we look in the mirror, we do see another face there, but we don't believe there's a whole other face in the mirror. We know it's just a reflection of our own face. So, we're able to see the false truth while knowing that it's false. It's not like our face has suddenly replicated into two faces. Still, it seems that there's a second face there. For a cat could be like a being who's never realized emptiness. They look in the mirror and they think it's a whole other cat there, and they want to fight with it or play with it, or they have some sort of like reaction most of the time, unless you've got a very smart cat there. So the cat is kind of like how we are. The appearances just appear, and we absolutely believe in the problematic appearance. Once we realize emptiness, we're like the human being who sees the reflection in the mirror but doesn't believe in the confusing appearance. A Buddha can see all of it simultaneously and beyond. So questions about omniscience are usually, is everything already planned out and fated? If they know everything, does that mean everything's decided? Those are usually questions we have about omniscience, and there's complex answers, but it's more like the Buddhas know all of the possibilities that can be known moment to moment, and also their perception of time is a lot more expansive. So it's not that everything is fated, but there might be a million possibilities of what will happen in the next second. And the Buddha knows all of those possibilities and the probabilities of what will happen. But things are shifting all the time, causes and conditions, people's minds, people's choices, people's karma ripening. Things are moving and changing all the time. And so it's not like it's decided, it's not like it's set in stone. But just like on the internet, when certain news stories start to trend, there can be kind of karmic trends happening with our individual consciousnesses. And a Buddha could quite accurately predict, you're going to have a realization in 5 years if you keep going this way. But something could happen, and it could be quicker or slower. Does that make sense in omniscience? Did you want to ask any follow-ups about omniscience?
Yes, I have a question. Unless we have been a Buddha, how do we know what a Buddha can see and think and do? How do we know this with such certainty? I don't understand this.
Yeah, and of course, it's not like we've been a Buddha and then regressed, right? Like, we haven't, gotten there and then been like, oops, nothing like that's happened. It's one of the things that is extremely hidden phenomena. So last week we were talking about manifest phenomena, hidden phenomena, and extremely hidden phenomena. Extremely hidden phenomena are things like karma, things like what a Buddha's mind can perceive, and the way that we can have some sort of trust in them is believing that the source of the information is a valid source, and then bringing in enough of our own experience and logic that's going that direction together with it. So Buddhas have told us what Buddhas can perceive. Buddha Shakyamuni has explained what omniscience is. Subsequent Buddhas have, practiced the path and achieved the same goal as the Buddha using the same tools that the Buddha provided. But it's not like he made those tools. It was how the mind works in general. He just was able to access that and develop it. It's not like he has the copyright on the steps to enlightenment. He wasn't the first Buddha, he wasn't the last Buddha. He's just the one most recent that human beings have been able to identify as a fully accomplished enlightened being. So personally, when I look at these topics that are not immediately provable by experience for me as an individual, I ask myself questions about progress within my own mental continuum. and why there would be a limit to that. Yeah. And if I look at my own mental training, and we all think about our own mental training and development, of course, there are years we get better and years we get worse, in certain things. But when there's consistent effort in a certain direction, the mind does get better. And that's something the Buddha has kind of presented to us, and we can try and see immediately within just the course of a few years, if we keep practicing exactly as the Buddha intended, with consistency and effort, change happens in a positive way. So that gives you conviction that the other things that will take longer to prove are probably so. But, you can kind of leave it in the open question category of maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. We'll just see. Yeah, we'll just see. And if the practices that this so-called omniscient being has offered me lead to more kindness, more peace, more wisdom in my life, there's no harm in pursuing them with enthusiasm, like this. So it is in the category of extremely hidden phenomena like karma, which is going to take a while for us to prove experientially. Yeah. So, okay, so then now more about the mind. We're going to go back to the quick review. The nature of consciousness or mind is that it's clear and knowing. Clear expresses the essential nature of consciousness, and aware or knowing expresses its function. So clear in the sense of reflective, aware or knowing in the sense of able to hold within the mind. So not in terms of accuracy or inaccuracy per se, but in a reflective sense that can hold in mind. So the mind is able to observe phenomena. And the word observe has kind of a visual connotation, but it doesn't need to, right? Observe phenomena, perceive phenomena, access phenomena. This is one of the abilities of the mind. And the analogy for the mind can be like the wide open sky, spacious and reflective, or like a pure mountain lake that also is reflective. Those kind of reflective, holding objects in them, metaphors can kind of help us. And then when we're talking about the mind, we are talking from the lower school perspective. So this is review, but I'll read it again. The hierarchical schema of the four schools of Buddhist philosophy. This is the four tenet schools you hear referred to. The Vaibhashika, Great Exposition. Sautrantika, Sutra School. Yogacharya, Mind Only. And Madhyamaka, Middle Way. The Madhyamaka school, particularly the Prasangikas, the consequentialist school, is considered the highest because its critiques of essentialism are said to yield the most accurate account of what truly exists. But the models of the mind and cognition endorsed by the Madhyamaka are drawn almost entirely from the three lower schools, namely the last two. So there's philosophical differences about the nature of reality between these four schools, but mostly we agree on how the mind works and functions. And so then we talked about how there are kind of three types of accurate kinds of minds called reliable cognizers or valid cognition. These are synonyms: reliable cognizers and valid cognition. So there's direct reliable cognizers, and these can apprehend evident or manifest phenomena. Factual reliable cognizers apprehend slightly obscure or hidden phenomena. And inferential cognizers, they're inferential reliable cognizers by authoritative testimony. For us ordinary beings, they apprehend very obscure or extremely hidden phenomena via that authoritative testimony. So I'll go a bit more into those cognizers probably in a few weeks, but these are the three main ones to kind of understand, and then we'll unpack them later. We talked very briefly about what an affliction is, and an affliction is that which disturbs the mind. And that was that word adventitious kept coming up, right? That word adventitious that means kind of falsely added or extra or removable. Afflictions are adventitious to the mind. They're additional to the mind. They're removable from the mind. But while they're there, they disturb the mind. And in Sanskrit, you'll hear klesha, in Tibetan, nyumo. And in English, there's a lot of discussion about a good translation for afflictions. Some translators will call them disturbing emotions. Some will call them emotional afflictions. Some will call them mental afflictions. Some will call them non-virtuous or negative mental states. But what we're talking about is the disturbing factors of the mind that agitate it. And because of that agitation, your ability to understand phenomena is even worse than usual, and your tendency to do negative actions of body, speech, and mind are worse. Okay, so this is a second translation of the same definition. So also emotional afflictions, etc., etc. So things like attachment, hatred, and ignorance, which motivate contaminated actions that cause one to continue to be born in cyclic existence. So what we're talking about here with afflictions are those kind of agitating factors that are basically the second noble truth, right? Remember, the first noble truth is suffering, 3 types of suffering, 6 types of suffering, 8 types of suffering, whatever categorization you like. But you know that there's suffering, you understand the first noble truth very well. The second noble truth, the truth of origin, is karma and disturbing emotions, right? And when we say karma and disturbing emotions are the origin of suffering or the cause of suffering, the result is suffering, the cause is karma and disturbing emotions. We're talking mainly about afflictions. Yeah, afflictions and disturbing emotions are synonyms in this case. So it's the afflictions that make us do the thing that is harmful, which plants the seed on our mental continuum, which then ripens as the suffering. Yeah, so these afflictions, this is the main enemy in the life. And it's not an act of self-harm to look at your own afflictions or afflicted habits and say, you are unacceptable and need to leave, because they are not you. They're just habits born from innate ignorance. And you know that they're problematic. You know, it's a little bit like if you were drunk and you said and did stupid things that you normally wouldn't do if you weren't drunk, you would know that the alcohol played a part in your bad choices, maybe a huge part in your bad choices. Similarly, the afflictions play a huge part in your bad choices. They're like an intoxicant of the mind, even though they come from the mind. But really, they come from the ignorance of the mind, all of which is removable. So if you can think of them like an invader or a foreign substance or something that is somehow not the core of you, and of course the core of you is a problematic framing, but we'll come back to that, then it's a lot easier to say, wow, I have a lot of attachment and that is ruining my life. Or wow, I have a lot of anger and that has hurt so many people. And just seeing it honestly and baldly with great honesty doesn't give you that cringy feeling of being seen or exposed. It doesn't make you feel defensive and ashamed. It makes you go, oh, I finally identified it. Okay, attachment's the bad one today. Oh, I know what to do with attachment. Does that make sense? Because otherwise, when you see your faulty mental habits or your faulty verbal or physical habits, usually you weaponize it against yourself and say, here's more ways why I'm bad. And, you know, and then that's not particularly helpful in getting over it. Then you feel like you have a lack of willpower or a lack of discipline or a fundamental flaw or an original sin or something in you that's just bad. You know, this is how we marry up our self-awareness, usually with all this heaviness, all this guilt, none of which is necessary, none of which is logical. Right? So afflictions are really important to understand because when they're small, your mind is so powerful that if you notice them when they're small, they fall apart. And you almost don't need a whole extra antidote. So for example, anger, you know, the antidote to anger is things like loving kindness, patience, or the wisdom realizing emptiness. Thinking of one of those three is going to really help you with your anger. But if your anger is very tiny, like annoyance and irritability, and your mind goes, oh, I feel anger arising, sometimes that very observation makes it go, oh, sorry, never mind, poof. Yeah, just that noticing of like, oh, I'm getting a bit grumpy. Oh, right, I'm getting a bit grumpy. Yeah, that's a little bit leaving a foothold for anger. All right, I see you. And it's almost like the affliction cringes and falls apart. So if you can get to know that disturbance in the mind means there's an affliction present, even if you don't know which one it is, that is a very important self-awareness and self-knowing. Because catching them when they're small is so much easier than when you've got a full-blown rage or a full-blown obsession, or, you know, it's really gotten ahead of steam. Is it making sense? And I know these are things that you know and things that you've known from other Dharma classes for many, many years, but it's important when we're talking about consciousness and things that are in the consciousness to not identify with all of those things. Get a little bit more kind of logistical, you know, a little bit more, okay, this helps these ones, these supports those ones, these ones are the not useful ones, these ones are the useful ones. And then it just becomes a matter of strategizing. Yeah, more than identification. We came by all of our mistakes honestly. We came by all of our habits through conditions that make total sense. You know that if you saw the whole spectrum of all of your lives, even if you remembered all of this life, the mistakes that you do and the problems that you think would make so much sense, and you'd be so much kinder to yourself. And you think, of course, that's how I got this way. And if you saw that in everyone else, you would have such compassion for them. But we don't know all that information. And so we have this kind of unrealistic thought that we should be a lot more perfect than we are. And it's too harsh and it's not realistic. Yeah. Okay. So afflictions, bad, right? So this usually refers to afflictive ignorance, which is distorted awareness. So there are many, many types of ignorance, but in this case, we're talking about distorted awareness. It is a mental factor rather than a primary mind. Ignorance is not simply not knowing the truth. It is the opposite of knowing the truth. It's a radical misunderstanding of reality. The misunderstanding is that things inherently exist. But what does that mean? Sometimes Lama Zopa Rinpoche will say it's like ignorance decorates reality with inherent existence. Some teachers will describe it like you superimpose additional characteristics that aren't there to people, to yourself, to all things. Yeah, like a decoration or a filter, you know, like an Instagram filter, making everything a little bit more solid than it is, a little bit more separate than it is, a lot more independent than it is. And because of that, we feel separate from each other in a way that we aren't. Even though we're not like all one mass universal consciousness ether situation, we all have individual mental consciousnesses, but the way our mental consciousnesses function are very similar to one another and almost infinitely interconnected. Yeah. So the problem is that grasping at inherent existence is just our default setting. It's the how we always are, unless we consciously address it. So we're always misperceiving reality all the time. And, you know, because it's such the default setting, we don't even notice. And because we don't even notice, all of the opinions about our observations we just assume are true. That's a good person, that's a bad person, that's one to avoid, that's one to bring closer. We just believe our own opinions. And the problem is, it's not like all those opinions are wrong on the surface. We notice patterns, we create, choices that bring us safety. We have some useful instincts, which we could just call habits. And because of that, it's harder for us to confront day to day the habit of ignorance. So understanding that ignorance colors everything, and we don't even notice until we've caught ourselves in a mistake. But we have to remember the times that we've noticed the mistake intentionally, so we can bring that wisdom into our everyday life and believe the lie less and less and less. So you can take some very simple example, which isn't quite the depths of this point, but is going in the right direction. Think of a time that you very much disliked someone, right? Just very much. A coworker or a relative or whoever. And you had a story about them in your mind about what kind of a person they are and what that meant for you in your life. And it felt very true. And it was based on a lot of past experience with similar people. And you're an adult, you've been around the block, you know this is true, right? That's a guy to watch. We're watching you. And then someone told you some information about them, like they just lost a family member, like they just lost a job, like they just had a huge physical disaster, something that made you understand their behavior in a whole different light, and your whole rock solid opinion about them collapsed into compassion. And you realized, I really was not giving them a break. I was not cutting them any slack. I was not seeing the whole picture. And in fact, I was the mean one. You have to remember some time in your life where you were wrong. Yeah, when you were just wrong about someone, and finding out more about them changed your perception of them. And if you cannot remember a single time in your life that you were wrong, try to start now, right? There's been a time. Yeah, but do it with humor, do it with gentleness, but really on purpose, try and go back in time and think, when have I been wrong about someone? I either thought they were too amazing or too horrible. Maybe it's easier to find a time where you held someone up to an impossible standard because they seemed like a magical being of light, right? Right? I don't know, whenever you had a crush as a teenager or something, right? And you thought that, rainbows came out of every pore and, everything they did was cute and endearing. And then you found out some extra information, which they always had. They didn't change anything. They had always been like that, but you found out, and suddenly the shine faded. Yeah. So remembering those times, then you can have a little bit more spaciousness whenever you're feeling solidly in your opinions about people. Just giving it a tiny bit more spaciousness to say, I have never known the whole picture or the whole story of anyone, including myself. Yeah, and let's just kind of give people a break, because if I knew the whole story, the natural conclusion to all stories is compassion. Every single person's behavior makes sense in a context, and all bad behavior comes from suffering. We already knew that, but we have to deeply know it on purpose, know it again and again, so that as soon as we see bad behavior, our first reaction is, oh, it's wrong. Not what's wrong with you, but what's wrong. You go straight to compassion rather than straight to aggression and aversion. Doesn't mean you can't be assertive. Okay. So ignorance, problematic. So now we're going to just shift gears to the framework of where consciousness lives in reality, okay? So we have the big category, okay? The big category is all phenomena. And all phenomena, without exception, are empty of inherent existence. But for us, all phenomena seem to inherently exist. So how do we classify phenomena? The first classification is there is permanent phenomena that doesn't change moment to moment, and there is impermanent phenomena which does change moment to moment. Permanent phenomena can come in and out of existence. Don't think eternal, I guess is a better word. Don't think eternal when you see permanent. Some permanent things are eternal. Some permanent things come in and out of existence, like the space inside a cup is permanent while there is space inside the cup. But if you break the cup or you fill the cup with water, that space within the cup, that permanent space, disappears. So while it exists, it doesn't undergo change, but that doesn't mean it exists forever. So the main example for permanent phenomena is uncompounded space. There are other forms of permanent phenomena, but we don't really talk very much about permanent phenomena because that's not what gives us trouble. Really, our life is about impermanent phenomena and navigating impermanent phenomena. So that's what we're going to talk about. So there are three types or three categories of impermanent phenomena: things that change moment to moment, form, which is the same as saying matter, consciousness, which is the topic of the course, and non-associated composites. And non-associated composites are basically things that are neither form nor consciousness, or both form and consciousness, depending on who you're talking to. But the easiest example of a non-associated composite is a person, right? Because a person has form and a person has consciousness, but they are not form and they are not consciousness. So consciousness is what we're talking about. And here's where we're going to get the first important division of consciousness: main minds, or primary consciousnesses, and mental factors, states of mind. Okay, so this is the main thing to understand. And when you see main minds or primary consciousnesses, think sky-like nature of the mind, vast and reflective. When you see mental factors, states of mind, think clouds, think weather, think changeable. Okay, so the first category was phenomena, that which retains or holds its essential nature. This is equivalent to existent, established base, object, knowable object. So it was related a bit to the question we had earlier. Form is any material or physical entity that is capable of physical interaction, whether on a subtle or coarse level. Non-associated compositional factors, or non-associated formative factors, depending on your translator. Some people call them abstract composites. This is all very annoying that we haven't standardized our translations, but better to just tell you now. Non-associated conditioning factors, abbreviated as factors, they encompass all impermanent phenomena not included in the class of material form or the class of mental phenomena. So as the second one says, impermanent phenomena that are neither forms nor consciousness. So example, a person. Primary consciousness, this refers to any of the six sense consciousnesses which arise in dependence upon the six sense faculties. See also main mind. So this is to really understand main mind and primary consciousness are going to be used interchangeably, completely synonymously. Don't get confused by that. When we talk about the six sense consciousnesses, it's what you would expect. You know, ear sense consciousness, eye sense consciousness, nose sense consciousness, taste sense consciousness, tactile sense consciousness, and mental sense consciousness. So again, remember, consciousness is aware of the mere nature of its object, the fifth of the five aggregates in this context. So when we say aware of the mere nature of its object, this is what's important to understand about primary consciousnesses. So main minds and mental consciousnesses don't happen at separate times. They happen at the same time, simultaneously. So right now, in your room, on your seat, you have 6 mental consciousnesses and probably 5 or 6 mental factors operating at any given time. Minimum 5, usually more than 5 mental factors together with those primary consciousnesses. There's a lot going on in there, but they take turns being emphasized or kind of taking prominence or driving. So right now, for example, you're listening to me, so your ear sense consciousness and the mental factors in its retinue, right? Like the ear sense consciousness is the king and the mental factors are the, ministers or whatever. They're probably the most dominant because you're listening. But your mental consciousness is also engaged because you're thinking about it and making choices about agree or disagree, clear or unclear, what shall I do with this information? There's a lot going on simultaneously. But the main minds, the primary consciousnesses, they don't have opinions. They're just reflective. They're just reflective. Okay, so that's that like mirror-like, mountain lake-like capacity of the mind. It's just reflecting. The mental factors are taking what is reflected and saying, I like that, I don't like that. The name of that is this. My feelings about it are that. I'll focus longer on this. I'll focus less on that. I'm going to make a choice based on this. All sorts of chatter is the mental factors. Does that make sense, that distinction? So the main minds are seeing the kind of the mere generality. The mental factors are what are kind of engaging and moving and talking, and whether it's in words or not, a lot more kind of active. And those mental factors might be useful or not useful, but they're always there, as are the main minds. Yeah, Ladan, go ahead.
Yes, hi everybody. Hey. Hi, Venerab. I have a question. When there's mental factors and the consciousness is about, I don't know, maybe I mix up with some of my French books, like knowing, awareness. You're aware that you are here, so it's your consciousness, and then all your sense consciousness comes to help or to bother this knowing. Right?
To bother it.
Because the all about knowing and be aware. So kind of your Buddha nature and the factors and all the karma that make you think that this is good, this is bad. They are, as you said, like what was the word? You add it to your awareness. Like they can't be.
You're mushing many concepts together in and so it will get tidier over time. So some of what you're saying is going the right direction, some of it's getting a little tangled, but don't worry, it's going to get clearer. The thing to understand is that, that saying that Inuit people have like 300 words for snow, right? Tibetan people have like 300 words for mind. Like there's so many words for mind and different aspects of the mind and characteristics of the mind. We don't have enough words in English. We don't have enough words in French. There's not enough words. Mm-hmm. So awareness and consciousness are usually synonymous, and that's the big umbrella category. Yeah. Big umbrella category. So then characteristics of consciousness, there are main mind, primary consciousness, characteristics of consciousness, and mental factor, states of mind, characteristics of consciousness, happening simultaneously. Some of them are very obviously afflicted, disturbing emotions that are completely incorrect, that are disturbing the mind. Some of them are accurate relatively, like compassion and love are mental factors that color the mind with positivity and accurate in terms of worldly convention, but they're still kind of tainted by innate ignorance. So there's still a grasping at inherent existence there. Does that help a little bit?
Yes, very
Yep.
much. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you asked and keep asking, but the words are frustrating, and the ways sometimes the same word will be used in slightly different ways is frustrating. But really that good old fashioned metaphor of the sky and the clouds, that is really helpful. Yeah, the
Yeah.
sky, open, expansive, reflective is like the main minds, the clouds coming and going, like the mental factors.
Yeah.
Good weather, bad weather, but it's weather. Yeah.
It's weather and awareness is the sky.
Awareness is like
Not
almost space, right?
based. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like
I
even
will
bigger sort of
stop.
category.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we've got big category consciousness, and then we have types of consciousness. Yeah, it's all consciousness, but yeah, context is very important here. Yeah, so is anybody else getting a bit tangled and want to ask a detangling question? I'm just scrolling back and forth, looking at my Zoom cubes. Nice to see you
I would
guys.
like to go further, but with really clear examples.
Yes, okay, so, all right, right now in this moment, okay, you've got your 6 primary consciousnesses hanging out. They're always there, but they kind of take turns being dominant. So sometimes your visual sense consciousness is kind of the most dominant, and the rest are kind of quiet in the background. So say it's your eye primary consciousness is kind of dominant, then you're observing forms. And the forms that you're observing, then your mental factors talk about them to you. And I'm saying talk about in a very colloquial sense. This is not a technical kind of explanation. But what you've got going on is you've got karma ripening from the past, which is giving you a feeling about what you observe. Yeah, a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, a neutral feeling about that what visual consciousness is holding or reflecting. Based on that feeling, you're probably going to have associations with that feeling and that form, which will make you describe it a certain way. So recognition is a mental factor that comes into play. And based on how you're recognizing that object that you see, you're going to have mental engagement, sometimes called attention, and kind of rest on it for a certain period of time. Might be the computer screen, right? And so you have attention, holding or focusing on that visual object. And then you have intention, creating new karma about it. So you're either wanting to go closer to it or further away from it in either an afflicted or non-afflicted way. Intention is like what moves the mind. It's kind of the will or the volition or the chooser. And it's kind of the mental factor that's most significant in terms of planting karmic seeds on your mental consciousness, which will then later ripen as future feelings, as well as future conditions and all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So the mental factors are arising simultaneously, the 5 omnipresent mental factors, for example. All 5 of them are happening at the same time, but they are bouncing off of each other as well. Yeah, what you feel has a relationship to how you describe your world. How you describe your world has a relationship to what you decide to do about it. So all of these things happening simultaneously are hard to, kind of isolate and draw a perimeter around and kind of say, that one is that one is that. But in terms of everyday life, if you're having an uncomfortable feeling, you often assume it's because of what is in front of you. What you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you're thinking about, you assume it's about the present moment, when in fact your current feeling is conditioned by the past. It's conditioned by past karma. And then your choices about it create your future. So what you want to say to yourself the next time you're feeling uncomfortable is, there is more happening than just this moment. My choices will dictate my future. So just because it's uncomfortable doesn't give me permission for an affliction. Even though normally or like naturally, uncomfortable also means grumpy, right? Or uncomfortable also means needy, or uncomfortable also means dissociative. Those are just patterns that you've connected over time, but they don't have to be connected. You know, you can have pain without suffering, things like that. You can experience pleasure without chasing more of it. You can experience pain without reacting with anger. But before you understand how the mind works, even on a basic level, it feels like you have no choice. But if you're feeling suffering, you have to be angry about it or sad about it or disassociated from it if you're feeling some sort of physical or mental pain. Your reaction feels necessary when in fact your reaction is just habitual. Yeah, and so knowing how the mind works kind of gives you the power back to look at your minds and your mental factors in terms of which ones do I have some influence over right now, and which ones I'm just going to need to work on over time because those habits are hardwired. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yes, it does. It helps a lot. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, a lot of this just resonates with your own life and your experience, doesn't it? You know, there was a time in your life, in your childhood, where pain equaled an affliction, right? Or happiness equaled attachment. And then you grew up a little bit and started to understand that just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean you have to come to the same conclusions about it. You know, just because I love the taste of chocolate cake doesn't mean chocolate cake is what I should always eat. You know, just because I feel pleasure in response to that condition doesn't mean that is the cause of the pleasure. It's just a condition. And it could easily become a condition for suffering if I keep misusing it. Right, so that you already know this from your life, yeah? Yeah, Stephen, go ahead.
Where would dreams come into play for this?
Yeah, no, yeah, it's here's where we can kind of pivot from the minds and mental factors presentation to kind of the tantric presentation, which is a little bit clearer about things like dreams. And basically, your mental consciousness, you know, of the 6 primary consciousnesses, take the mental one. The mental one can be either perceptual or conceptual. That's a conversation for later, but that mental consciousness can also be coarse, subtle, or extremely subtle. So the coarse mind is our everyday experience, walking around, thinking, observing, choosing, whatever. That's our, you know, everyday coarse consciousness. Our subtle consciousness is accessed in deep meditation and accessed in dreams. And then our extremely subtle consciousness is what's called the clear light mind. And for ordinary people, that's only manifest at the time of death. But for very advanced meditators, they can access that not just at the time of death. So basically, that clear light mind is kind of your very most subtle, most fundamental mind, completely undistracted from all of the senses, all of the stimuli, all of the karmic impressions. It's just that very pure consciousness. And it's what carries the karmic seeds from life to life. So that one, we very rarely have any connection with. We touch it for a second each time we go to sleep. We touch it for a second when we sneeze, other times as well. But the subtle consciousness we access during dream states, and then we access during meditative states. And then the question, you know, the question becomes, is it a lucid dream or not a lucid dream? And so that's kind of talking about how workable is your subtle consciousness, and you can start to train your subtle consciousness.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also have one more question about memories.
Memories are
because they do change.
Yeah. And memory is something that you would think it would be on the list of like the 51 mental factors, but what's on the list is the word mindfulness, which of course is a word you've heard a million times, but actually just means non-forgetting of a, you know, of a known object, non-forgetfulness. And so if you've been mindful of something, you have more impressions and more associations with it. And memory itself is a collection of many things, not just kind of one thing. Just like the word emotion is too broad, the word memory is too broad. There's many things happening simultaneously that could go under the umbrella emotion or the umbrella memory. So it's a case where English words and psychological framing don't work completely perfectly with Buddhism, even though the same ideas exist. There's kind of more words talking about that experience than just one. Yeah. But yeah, so memory is, of course, related to karma as well, you know, kind of what's stored karmically, whether it's consciously remembered or it's unconsciously habituated, you know, which one would we call memory? You know, it's tricky. And like subconscious, conscious, these kind of psychological terms. For Buddhists, the subconscious we would more likely call karmic conditioning. Yeah, stuff like that. So there's some interesting parallels. Perhaps I should make a Venn diagram for next time. Perhaps a chart should come up. So are there other questions about what we've talked about so far?
I was just thinking, because it was such a radical concept when you were speaking about that, you know, the feeling is conditioned by past habit patterns, and you were using the chocolate cake as an example, that, you know, the feeling of pleasure, I think, is coming from the chocolate cake. But that chocolate cake could also, you know, be a condition for feeling sick if I eat too much of it. And it was, you know, I was just thinking as you were speaking, because that I do all the time. I always think it's the object that makes me feel a certain way. But you're saying it's actually, I need to look at my mind, because the way I'm reacting is actually coming from prior conditioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Not, okay.
And you know, it's tricky, because if you have a habitual association with something and assume that it will bring a certain kind of pleasure, and your mind is all kind of, all the ducks are in a row, psychologically speaking and karmically speaking, one certain object can consistently give you pleasure, but it's never going to become the cause. I mean, it's a little bit like your very favorite song that you love, that, you know, gets you swept up into, you know, lifts your heart, makes all of your neurons fire, gets all your dopamine going. If you had to listen to your favorite song all day, every day without stopping, it would start to make you feel sick. That, you know, your very favorite song, like maybe it would take a few days because it's your very favorite song, but eventually you'd be like, oh my God, stop, 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 stop. You know, if it was actually the cause of happiness, it would always work. So it's kind of taking back the power of objects while still at the same time acknowledging your relationship to objects and your habituation towards them. So in any given moment, what we have happening is an old karmic seed is ripening into experience, and our reaction to it is planting the new seed. So if you're having an unpleasant experience in relationship to a positive mind that you're stating, right? Say you're conjuring up a feeling of love, but you feel quite uncomfortable and distressed. An old karmic seed is finishing, and you're watering the seeds and planting seeds for a positive, happy experience, but it's going to take a minute for you to feel the impact of that. You know, and so there's no moment where karma isn't ripening. Karma is ripening constantly. Karma is being created constantly. And what we decide to do is say, whether it's happiness or whether it's suffering, let my response be in alignment with my path, which will plant more positive seeds, but will also water a lot more old seeds. Yeah, because you've got all sorts of old good karmic seeds hanging out back there, just hanging out. Yeah, and you're not watering them. You could be happy all the time. They're not getting any nourishment, you know, so don't feel like you're, you know, you have to suffer in order to practice. It's quite the opposite. It's like the more you practice, the happier you'll be, because you're both subduing negative states of mind and watering your old seeds, plus planting new positive seeds. Yeah, so that mental factor of intention, that's your guy, right? The one that's deciding and landing and choosing and behaving, that volition, that will, that's really what we want to kind of take the reins of. and shift priority. Because usually in our mental factors, we have a lot of belief and identification with either how we feel or what we describe or recognize. Yeah, so recognition or feeling usually feel like our identity. If you say, who am I? And you go more subtle than your body, and you go into your mind, and you go more subtle than your memory and your associations of yourself, the feeling of I is usually resting with how you feel, or resting with your ability to articulate and describe your experience, whether verbally or non-verbally. So instead of allowing that to continue to be the case, shift to, are my intentions in alignment with my path? You know, and keep reviving your positive motivation again and again. And then your conditioning recognition and your empowering feeling, so that you have better thoughts and more pleasant feelings.
So, excuse me,
Sure.
as on this way, doing it more and more, we can say that you change your karma. You change your karma each time that you put an intention, even if I did something bad, but I regret it, or even if I did something bad, but my intention was good. So it change a little bit your your karma.
Well, yeah, certainly you're adding more positive karma, and you're allowing your negative karma to exhaust without creating more. So when you suffer, but you don't react with a negative state of mind, that karma finishes. But if you suffer and you react with a negative state of mind, you just plant the seeds for more of the same, right?
Yes. So
Yeah.
we have the possibility of changing our karma to the positive if we know.
Yeah, I mean, the way you're framing it, I'm having some resistance to. But generally speaking, yes. Generally speaking, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you are feeling some bad things happening to you, but you don't say why me, because you know that you cultivate the cause of it and it's empty of inherent existence. So the manner
Yep.
that you manage it, it's bring it
Yeah,
like
that.
less that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm glad that you ask. But you know, the main thing here is to really think, what is the more empowered stance? Is it to feel like life is just happening to me all the time and I'm just like a victim of circumstance? Or is it more empowering to think, I have some degree of control over my own reactions to my own experience? And actually, that gives me a lot more confidence and power about how I orchestrate the conditions in my life and how I go on to benefit others. And, you know, if you're feeling like a passive participant in your own life, what is the use of that? You know? And how does anything ever change if you just feel like you're being buffeted around by the winds of karma? At some point, you know, you have to say to yourself, do I want to keep living this way exactly? Or could things be deeper and better? And could my benefit be wider? You know, do I want a small life feeling like a victim, or do I want, you know, a really powerful life feeling joyful and beneficial, you know, like that. Okay, so quick review and then stretch and then meditate. Review, stretch, meditate. Okay, so big category, all phenomena. All phenomena are divided into permanent and impermanent. We're looking at permanent. Particularly, we're looking at consciousness. Consciousness being the big category, which we can look at different characteristics of consciousness being the main minds, of which there are 6 types. And the mental factors, there are 51, there are more than 51, you know, but there's 51 main ones, which can be divided into 6 categories, which we'll look at some other day. But really, we're looking at sky-like nature, reflective and expansive, not so opinionated, and then the factors that condition it or color it or direct it. Yeah, so this is the main thing we're looking at. And are there questions that you want me to talk about next time, or topics that you're wanting me to address at the top of the next lesson before we have a little stretch? Stuff about consciousness you've been particularly curious about? Yeah, just keep on going. Okay. Okay, so let's have just a 2-minute leg stretch. Go to the bathroom if you need to, and then we'll meditate. All right, so just take a minute and ground yourself by settling into the space. You can take a minute to focus on a physical sensation. And if you like the breath, or if you prefer to focus on the soles of the feet, just take a minute and really ground yourself. Allowing any tension to dissolve. Just very gently invite your body to relax. Invite your mind to relax. And now shift your mind to really consciously focusing on the thoughts that come and go. But watch them in a way that you're not engaging with them. You're not agreeing with your thoughts. You're not disagreeing with your thoughts. You're not chasing some or suppressing others. Just be present with awareness of thinking, whether those thoughts are in words or images. If it goes quiet, if it goes noisy, just be in observation. What's going on with your mental factors right now? A bit like as if you were watching the reflections travel across the surface of a still lake. Sometimes spacious and simple. Sometimes a bird flies by or wind moves the trees. But you're just watching without engagement. And try to keep your focus bright and alert, not falling into the thoughts, not avoiding the thoughts, just observing them. And as you become used to watching the movement, the mental factors, see if you can gently shift to watching main mind, the aspect that reflects, as opposed to what is reflected. Just experiment without any pressure. If you can shift your focus to the clarity of the mind, that awake mirror-like state that holds impressions without deciding what they mean. The reflector, not what is reflected. Watch what holds, what reflects, as if merging with it, open and expansive. And thoughts and mental factors will continue to have impressions, be attractive. You'll want to follow them. But you're just choosing not to find them so interesting right now. See if you can give your interest to the reflective aspect, the mirror-like aspect, spacious and vast. And it's natural to drift, but when you drift, catch that and gently come back to focus. Attentive with no pressure. Watching without needing to find. And if a thought seems to capture your attention, imagine releasing it, like letting go of a balloon. And come back to the clarity and spaciousness of your mind. Underneath or above or holding something different than all of the chatter, all of the movement. Something else is there as well, bright and clear. And then gradually become aware of your body once again. Present, peaceful, grounded. Come back to your physical experience. And come back to your coarser consciousnesses. And gradually release your attention. Okay. So thanks everyone, and have a good night. And we'll just dedicate. Jantu semcho rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi Kepa nyampa mepa yang gone gondu pelwa sho. May the precious Bodhi mind that is not yet arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen have no decline, but increase more and more. Okay. And Lozar Tashidelik, Happy New Year.
Yes,